The history of Philadelphia: addiction, homelessness, and hope. Philadelphia is known as the birthplace of American democracy, a city where the nation's founding documents were written and where generations of immigrants, entrepreneurs, and working-class families helped build one of the country's most influential urban centers. For centuries, Philadelphia stood as a symbol of opportunity, industry, and cultural diversity. Yet today, many people around the world recognize the city for a different reason: the highly visible effects of addiction and homelessness in neighborhoods such as Kensington. This documentary looks beyond the headlines to explore how Philadelphia arrived at this point. Rather than reducing the city to its current challenges, it traces the historical, economic, and social forces that shaped modern Philadelphia, while highlighting the resilience of the people who continue to call it home. The story begins with Philadelphia's early development as a major port city and industrial powerhouse. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, factories, shipyards, textile mills, railroads, and manufacturing plants provided stable employment for hundreds of thousands of residents. Entire neighborhoods grew around these industries, creating close-knit communities where families often worked for the same employers across multiple generations. The city became a destination for immigrants from Europe, migrants from the American South, and people seeking economic opportunity. During this period, Philadelphia experienced remarkable growth, and many residents believed that steady employment and home ownership would provide lasting security for future generations. By the middle of the 20th century, however, the city's economy began to change dramatically. Manufacturing jobs gradually disappeared as industries relocated to other regions or overseas, leaving behind abandoned factories and rising unemployment. The loss of stable employment affected entire communities, particularly neighborhoods that had depended on industrial work for decades. Population declined as many families moved to the suburbs in search of new opportunities, while others remained in neighborhoods facing increasing poverty, declining investment, and reduced access to quality education, healthcare, and economic opportunity. These long-term economic changes created challenges that would influence the city's future for decades. The documentary then examines how substance use evolved over time. During the 1980s, many Philadelphia neighborhoods struggled with the crack cocaine epidemic, bringing increased violence, incarceration, and lasting impacts on families and communities. In the following decades, the opioid epidemic emerged through widespread prescribing of opioid pain medications, followed by increasing heroin use and, more recently, the rapid spread of fentanyl. These shifts transformed addiction into one of the city's most urgent public health challenges. The film explains that addiction is influenced by a combination of biological, psychological, and social factors, and that experiences differ from person to person. Understanding this complexity is essential to understanding why the crisis has affected so many communities across Philadelphia and beyond. A central focus of the documentary is Kensington, a neighborhood that has become one of the most recognized symbols of the opioid crisis in the United States. Once a thriving manufacturing district filled with textile mills and factories, Kensington experienced decades of economic decline after industrial jobs disappeared. Over time, the neighborhood became a center for drug distribution and open-air drug markets, attracting national and international attention. The documentary provides historical context for these changes while recognizing that Kensington is also home to long-term residents, small businesses, schools, churches, and community organizations. It emphasizes that no single neighborhood can be defined solely by its greatest challenges. The film also explores the relationship between addiction, homelessness, mental health, and poverty. Many people experiencing homelessness face multiple overlapping challenges, including untreated mental illness, trauma, financial hardship, and limited access to affordable housing. At the same time, not everyone experiencing homelessness has a substance use disorder, and not everyone living with addiction is homeless. By presenting these issues with nuance, the documentary encourages viewers to move beyond stereotypes and recognize the diverse circumstances that shape individual lives. Interviews with healthcare professionals, outreach workers, social service providers, Researchers and residents help explain how these issues intersect and why lasting solutions require coordinated efforts across multiple sectors. While acknowledging the severity of the crisis, the documentary also highlights stories of resilience, compassion, and recovery. It follows individuals who have overcome addiction, families rebuilding their lives, volunteers providing food and medical care, healthcare workers expanding access to treatment, and organizations working to reduce harm and connect people with housing and support services. Long-term commitment. They also illustrate the dedication of many Philadelphians who continue working to strengthen their communities despite significant obstacles. As the documentary concludes, it broadens its perspective to consider Philadelphia's future. The city continues to invest in economic development, neighborhood revitalization, public health initiatives, and expanded treatment services, while community organizations advocate for policies that address both immediate needs and the underlying causes of addiction and homelessness. Although the challenges remain significant, there are also reasons for optimism rooted in the city's history of resilience and reinvention. Philadelphia has overcome wars, economic upheaval, epidemics, and periods of profound social change throughout its history. The people working toward recovery, opportunity, and stronger neighborhoods represent the next chapter in that ongoing story. Ultimately, the history of Philadelphia, addiction, homelessness, and hope is not simply a documentary about addiction or homelessness. It is a documentary about history, economic transformation, public health, and the enduring. By examining the past with honesty and the present with compassion, the film invites viewers to look beyond the headlines and understand the human stories that define Philadelphia today.